Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to what I find an extremely exciting addition to the Holism story. It's a graph I developed during my PhD study. You may have seen the introduction video. If you haven't, I recommend you do it. It'll give you a nice overview. I think it's called the overview. It'll give you a nice overview of this entire graph. But what this video is, we're going to start looking at the basics of the Smuts scale, overall, a bit of an overview as well. And then second video, we'll move into the science-mind relationship. And the third video, we'll move into the religion relationship. So this one is going to look at the graph and particularly, to start with, the Smuts scale. So overview, big picture. The graph is divided into 4 different parts. The very bottom part is the Smuts Holism evolution scale. And I'm going to go into that in this video. But if you look at the other parts, you'll see it's divided into body, soul, and spirit, otherwise science, mind, and religion. Now, what the idea was in my study was, because I'm a science teacher, it really irks me that there's no obvious moving, breathing conversation between science and religion. And every time one tries to do it, you get caught up in some kind of ideological debate. And that's not cool. That's just not scientific either. And it's not devotionally heartfelt religious either. So kind of it's almost like we've been forced by all kinds of ideological positioning to not see what's actually going on. So fundamentally, we kind of sit in the soul mind region. That's all we've got. And everything else kind of bridges from there. So soul or mind is really the bridge in this entire graph. And it's where I went in my study and I used people's personal experiences of near-death experiences, people who claim to talk to nature spirits or talk to animals, animal communication, and so on, a bunch of different or alternative or unusual experiences. And I also, if you look at the videos I did on the senses, I also really examined the senses to just get a sense of actually everything is really that we know subjective. But of course, in science, we like to think that we're dealing with objective facts. And they are, because they're externally manifest. So there is a degree of objectivity that we can claim, but most of what we can claim actually seems to be in the subjective realm. So that's in the next couple of videos. This one, I'm just going to look at the Smuts scale in particular to get a feeling for what's going on there. Why did Smuts, or how did Smuts come up with that scale? Now, that is also part of the overview of all of Holism video, but I'm going to go through trying to present some of the Holism concepts for this graph. So Big Bang, boof, energy gets pumped out into the universe. After a fairly short space of time, that energy coalesces into subatomic particles, and those subatomic particles are the basis of the atom, and after a little bit more time, they coalesce into atoms. So that's probably the most rapid transformation in evolution, as far as I'm aware. And I could be wrong in terms of timescales. But science says that after a fairly short period of time, already the energy of these fundamental particles had flown out enough for them to begin joining together to form neutrons, protons. Electrons are fundamental particles. And then a bit more time for them to come together to form hydrogen, helium, and apparently tiny amounts of lithium as well. And that's matter. So energy is a very particular substance showing like rapidly this holism evolution, rapidly showing the tendency of each of these phases to kind of grow, mature, reach a state of, I suppose, maturity is the best word, some kind of developed possession of self to gather together to allow something different, something greater to manifest. In this case, matter. So energy is studied in physics, subatomic particles, vibrations, waves, and so on. Matter studied in chemistry. Now, matter took a heck of a long time to evolve. You can imagine from those first elements, an enormous amount of time before the universe has settled down, and these atoms, gravity pulling them together into these primal suns and stars, cooking up the bigger elements, exploding them out, coming back, cooking some more, until we have this huge range of elements that we study in the periodic table, which is why matter really is a question of chemistry. But it's not just there, it's also in all the conditions of the Earth. So primal suns and stars exploding, carrying on. Eventually, our solar system is here. Well, first of all, our galaxy, our solar system, and in our solar system, the Earth conditions in this gorgeous, what's called the Goldilocks positioning. Perfect amount of energy. You can see energy is still very present. Matter with an enormous, nice range of elements. An atmosphere thick enough to trap some heat, not too thick that we get too hot. So we've got a comfortable range of temperatures, and life, therefore, able to emerge. And so there's this wave after wave of emergence of substances becoming mature, ready to allow for the next to come up. So you can think of plants, think of the most kind of evolved plant forms, and you'll get a sense of all the structures, the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, then the flowering, the seeds, and everything's a part of this huge environment still. So it's not like plant life is independent from matter and energy. It's intimately related to them. So every new thing that emerges kind of emerges into or out of whatever was there before. So mind, think there of the higher animals. Obviously, it needs a body. That body needs to have evolved to an incredible degree of maturity that mind can begin to manifest. And then, of course, the human being, the human personality, what I call the growing self, into an incredibly mature and evolved mind. And so the human personality is dependent or is fundamentally, intimately related to everything that comes before it on that scale. And so the evolutionary scale, according to Smuts and my thinking, is a perpetual blossoming of something new. It's almost like a flowering without all the other work having gone on underneath, beyond, behind, and around. Any of these manifestations, higher manifestations, are just not possible. So there's a gorgeous humility that's connected to it, but there's also a completely different relationship, a much more liberated, less mechanistic relationship to the universe as these new things arise. And think of the plant. It's a nice picture for me. Everything's rooted to the ground. The flower sends out pollen into the air, and eventually it'll send out its seeds. So its relationship to the environment is much greater up at that highest level in independence. The only independent, truly independent new being that moves is the seed to give rise, potentially give rise to a whole new plant. So the further up you go in the scale, the more liberated and the more independent. And so the human personality, well, what I call the growing self, again, a beautiful manifestation of holism. Because what are we perpetually doing? We are perpetually gathering new experiences, integrating them into our sense of self, integrating them into our sense of reality. And they're always coming from our environment. And we are building some kind of holistic relationship or understanding of the world out of that. So where to from here? That's the question. And so you can see on the graph, I've got spirit self, and I'll come to that more detail in the third video when we look at spirit and religion. But if I can put it really basically, we know that the human personality has a mind, it has life, it's made up of matter and energy. All of these substances contribute. So it seems sensible, so also says Smuts, that whatever's going to emerge after us, and we need to imagine that something's going to emerge after us, unless we are arrogant enough to believe we are the pinnacle of all of evolution. But everything seems to point to the fact that that's not going to be the case. Of course, you need to wrestle with that in your own thinking. But the only place that I've recognized that we can turn to that gives us a real sense of that from ancient wisdom comes from the religions. And all of the religions claim that there is going to be some kind of newness, a heaven, a new earth, a new heaven, a new earth. some form of enlightenment or nirvana, Atman or paradise, or a variety of words are used in different religions. And the logic, this is the key here, the logic is how are we going to get there? How's this new step of evolution going to arise or manifest? How's it going to reach into the manifest realm? And that's only through a mature personality. And we know that we're not very mature. We're riddled with all kinds of inconsistencies. And we know that if our mind is inconsistent, well, it's very hard for the personality to make any use of it. If our life system is inconsistent, the same is true. Matter or radioactivity is a form of disintegration of matter. That happens, life can't survive, and obviously minds and personalities suffer as well. So although the personality is an extremely young entity, we are perpetually involved in this holistic activity of integrating everything, making it ourselves. And for Smuts, Goethe was a really good picture of that, because Goethe had powerful experiences and he enabled somehow himself to take all these very strong experiences and integrate them and grow himself to be able to withstand stronger and greater experiences and events, and somehow keep his being intact. Now we all have different degrees of our capacity to be able to do that. But if you think of that, and then you think of, if you are religious, whoever your kind of religious conceptual presence is, if it's a single being or a god or whatever it happens to be, imagine what that is, excuse me, and then imagine something of that quality happening for the human being. And I'm going to end this video with the picture that's given to us from almost every single near-death experience. And, excuse me, near-death experiences seem to be the closest that we can get to description of what that experience feels like. And it's a blessedness, a profound sense of love, loving, being loved. And it's got a quality of warmth about it, and light, brightness, and knowledge, knowingness, wisdom or insight. And so the kind of consciousness that this new presence, the spirit self, for want of a better term, will have, and there are several human beings in the world who claim to have this, will be very different from our own. So we can only imagine what it might be that might help us to move in that direction. But that's not the purpose of the videos that will follow. The videos that will follow will start by looking at, the next video will look at how we study these different Smuts substances scientifically, what our soul experience of those are. And then the third video will step into the spirit, religion, indigenous knowledge. I didn't write that there, it's too long, forgive me. But I obviously very much look from an indigenous knowledge perspective, trying to show a breathing how the intimacy between these, the holistic intimacy that Goethe has so strongly focused on, will emerge, hopefully, for us. So thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join for part 2, where we look at science and the mind.